All right, Nick, let's talk about the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, Kellen Moore, new head coach of this team. Very exciting after what he was able to do in Philadelphia. And we're starting to see this staff get filled out. A lot of really smart moves made so far by Kellen Moore on this staff. And one in particular really stands out early on. We're going to break that down in just a moment. But before we get to that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, Kellen Moore, really smart hire so far on this staff. I really like a lot of stuff that's going on. Let's get into it and we'll talk more about it on the other side. This, of course, from over on NBC Sports. The Saints are hiring Brendan Nugent as their offensive line coach. Nugent returns to the Saints after working with New Orleans as the offensive line coach in 2015 to 2021. He replaced John Benton, who was hired by the Seahawks as their offensive line coach. He most recently was the assistant offensive line coach of the Seahawks in 2024, and Nugent coached for the Chargers as their offensive line coach in 2022 and 2023. Strong hire for the Saints. Curious what your thoughts are on this one, Nick. But before we get to you, Saints fans, in the comment section below, let us know your thoughts on this hire in particular and maybe some of the other hires and candidates you want to see for this team as well as things get nailed down. I think it's going to move really quickly here, but go ahead, grade this hire in the comment section below and maybe let us know who else you are looking for to join Kellen Moore on the Saints staff in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this latest move by Saints?
So the most important thing when you're hiring an offensive line coach is you have to have alignment between the offensive line coach and the play caller slash offensive coordinator. They have to be on the same page. I've been on some teams when I play college football, D1 AA, FCS, small level stuff, when there was a little bit of misalignment, and you can create big problems. If the O line coach thinks you need to run power more, and the offensive coordinator thinks they want to spread things out and just be aggressive throwing the football, and you just have that very obvious, palpable disalignment, there'll be big issues because, as we saw in the Super Bowl, if there's offensive line trust issues and offensive line performance issues, things fall apart even for the greatest teams, even for the best quarterbacks. So getting an offensive line coach that's on the same page as you, Kellen Moore, new head coach, new play caller for the New Orleans Saints, is critical. And look, Nugent was a guy who worked with Kellen Moore. They worked together with the Chargers. They'll be on the same page. They'll be aligned. So they'll avoid that big problem. That's always a concern of mine when you have young coaches, first-time coaches, they hire O-line coaches. Sometimes they try and get, the bigger, sexier names, but they kind of have a disagreement to them. You want to make sure you're aligned, everyone on the same page. First and foremost, that's so important, but especially when you've got a former quarterback, play caller, guy worried about the quarterback position almost exclusively in Kellen Moore, and then you've got an O-line coach. You guys got to be on the same page. Great hire to help solve that problem. But you also have a guy here in Nugent who knows winning football. 7 of the past 8 seasons of him coaching, those seasons were winning seasons. So he's played and coached, I should say, a lot of really good football in his time as an offensive coach, predominantly on the offensive line, of course. But the fact is, he also was here when the Saints were previously at their best, right? Obviously, the last half decade or so has been kind of a rough down year for the New Orleans Saints. But Nugent was here when they were still winning 11, 12, 13 games. I think that's important. You need a guy who understands the culture. You need a guy who understands the incredible energy and just vibe the Saints had for such a period of time. I mean, basically from like 2006 to 2020, maybe 2019, 21, something like that. The Saints were the funnest game in town, right? They were aggressive, they were crazy, bonkers fan base, always on TV, always so energetic. Whether they're going 8-8, Drew Brees was throwing for 5,000 yards, or they were making deep playoff runs, they were must-watch TV. There was a great culture there in New Orleans. I think Kellen Moore is trying to recreate that a little bit, and I think that's a great strategy. Again, not the sexiest hire in Nugent, but a guy who, one, is perfectly aligned with Kellen Moore's strategy and mindset. Two, knows the culture of the city and the organization. Those two things are really important because right now the Saints, they've got talent, right? They're not starting from scratch. This isn't a total rebuild. We know the Saints have some good players, especially on the offensive line. When healthy, they're actually one of the top, I would say, top 10 offensive lines in the entire National Football League. Granted, that's when they're healthy, but I think there's a lot of good pieces, especially Fuaga, excuse me, if I don't butcher his name a third time. He is a really nice tackle. He did a lot of great things his rookie year. When healthy, it's a great unit. They just need a guy to kind of iron out a few things, working with Kellen Moore to fix the offense. I love this hire from Moore, and I think it's a sign that the Saints are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, Nick, and I agree with you, especially on the familiarity both with the Saints and with Moore is going to be important for the offensive side of the staff. I think with the defensive side of the staff is more where he goes out and gets more veteran guys, more experienced guys, guys that have, been around the league a long time. So he doesn't have to worry about the defensive side of the ball as much. We've talked about a lot of new head coaches. They don't want to get too bogged down early on, and they want to be able to focus on the head coaching aspect, as well as Kellen Moore is going to be the play caller for the Saints team. So he's got a lot on his plate. So having that nailed down on the defensive side, but then having guys that he doesn't have to worry about on the offensive side, as far as like you alluded to, being familiar with him, having everything lined up, all their ducks in a row, everybody on the same page, it's going to be really key, in especially his first year as a head coach, because there's a lot of little things that can go wrong as a head coach. And I think Moore making a lot of moves like that, especially you look at the latest hire that popped up for the Saints as well, getting Chase Hazlitt out of Dallas, a guy that he formerly worked with, to be their new tight ends coach as well. Same kind of vein as this. I think O-line probably a little bit more important than the tight ends, but same kind of thing. A guy is familiar with. Hazlitt also a guy familiar with the Saints as well. His dad, Jim Hazlitt, was with the Saints for a while, so there's that family, aspect in there. He knew what the Saints were all about growing up in that household. Same vein. Seems like Kellen Moore making a lot of really smart hires, kind of just all the same type of stuff. There's a common theme among these guys. I'm really excited to see how the rest of this staff fills out, but so far, so good for the Saints and Kellen Moore.
Yeah, and just one final point to end on here. Whenever you bring in a new coach, new coaching staff, you're usually looking for one of two things: either a change in culture or a change in X's and O's. And when you hire Kellen Moore as a young offensive-minded head coach, you're thinking predominantly it's going to be X's and O's. New schemes, help the quarterback out, help the offense out. The fact that Kellen Moore is making these kind of hires, the Saints may have gotten a double whammy here. They've gotten a great culture fit and more with the people he's bringing in, plus as an X's and O's with his offensive expertise. It was a slow offseason, obviously, up to this point. The Saints were the last guy to hire their head coach officially. But I tell you what, so far so good for New Orleans and Kellen Moore.